Hello students. We talked about understanding the levels of organization in living things, and we started out with atoms and atoms bonding together to form molecules and compounds, and then more macromolecules coming together to form very large compounds. And we talked about the four different categories of macromolecules that are important to living things. Those come together to form organelles, and organelles to cells, and cells with similar functions to tissues, and then tissues working together to form an organ, then organ systems to the organism. Now let's look just for a few minutes at the cell. Now this is a picture of a cell model that we have in the lab. It looks a lot different from the cell drawing you have in your textbook and in your lab manual. That drawing that are in those books is an artist's rendition of a cell with all the cell parts. You're not going to find a cell in your body that has all the cell parts that they have drawn in that picture in one cell. Okay, but we are going to look at the cell parts that are important to you on this lab model, and what you will be responsible for the lab practical, and the function of these cell parts. Now the cell in general is made up of three major parts: the cell membrane, the cytoplasm, and the nucleus. Now here's the cell membrane. That's the outermost limit of the cell. It's pliable. That means that it can be sort of pressed in and rebound and a little squished here and there, and not lose its contents of the cell. It's pliable. Okay, that cell membrane acts as a barrier to the outside of the cell. It's holding all the contents of the cell in. It also acts as a barrier to control what moves into and out of the cell. Now later on we're going to be talking about two processes that happen with the cell membrane in different tissues, and that's called osmosis and diffusion. What diffusion is the movement of molecules from an area of higher concentration to an area of lower concentration. So if you have a high concentration of molecules outside of this cell, and that molecule is able to move through this cell membrane, then this cell membrane will have pores that would allow those molecules to move into the cell. If it's higher concentration on the outside, that would allow for them to move into the cell. Now that's one job that cell membrane has, is that it controls what moves through that membrane, whether by diffusion, osmosis, or by any means. Okay, osmosis is the same as diffusion, but it's through a cell membrane, and you have water and concentration of molecules on either side that control the movement of water through that membrane. So the definition of osmosis would be the diffusion of molecules through a cell membrane. Molecules of water, though. That water could have other molecules of other substances in it, but anyway, it's the movement of water across a cell membrane from an area of higher concentration to an area of lower concentration of water. So that's osmosis, but we'll go a little bit more into that later on. I just wanted to introduce you to osmosis and diffusion since we are talking about the cell membrane. Okay, so cell membrane separates the contents of the cell from the outside, the interstitial fluids, other cells close by. Sometimes cells come together, bind together, they form a layer of tissue, or there may be just links between two cells to form a tissue. Okay, the cell membrane. Inside of the cell membrane, all the contents between the cell membrane and the nuclear membrane, that's the outside membrane around the nucleus, all the contents of this cell from the cell membrane to the nucleus would be the cytoplasm. So all this material that's floating around in this area between the cell membrane and the nuclear membrane is called cytoplasm. All these organelles, the fluid called cytosol, all this stuff is the cytoplasm. Now the nucleus is the control center of the cell. It has information inside that determines whether or not the cell is going to divide, if it's going to divide, the number of times it will divide, and when it is going to divide. It also has DNA, genetic information, and DNA is responsible for basically making proteins to build new structures, repair structures, build organelles, and so. And this genetic material, this DNA, is found on chromatin. Chromatin is all stretched out and found in the nucleus. If we were looking in one of our cells with a compound microscope, we wouldn't see the chromatin. It's not until it's condensed and wrapped around histones, or those proteins that the DNA wraps around, it will form chromosomes. And when it forms chromosomes, it's condensed, so we can see that condensed genetic material, the chromatin wrapped around the histones, the proteins form chromosomes, and we can see that. Chromatin is all stretched out, so we can't normally see that. When it's getting ready, the cell is getting ready to divide, we should be able to see the chromosomes as the chromatin condenses. Alright, as we go outside of the cell, we can see these channels, the network of membranes that go all through the cell here. They're interconnected with the cell membrane and the nuclear membrane, and this provides a transport system. And attached to this transport system are these ribosomes. This transport system forms the membrane called endoplasmic reticulum. The endoplasmic reticulum that have ribosomes attached, because of its rough appearance, is called rough endoplasmic reticulum. Now, some endoplasmic reticulum does not have ribosomes attached, and so we call that smooth endoplasmic reticulum. Alright, the mitochondria are found in the cytoplasm. These kidney-shaped organelles here are called mitochondria. They are two layers of membranes together, and the main function of mitochondria, sometimes nicknamed the powerhouse of the cell, is to break down the food, the nutrients. After nutrients have been broken down, is to use those compounds to build ATPs, to make or synthesize ATPs. Uses oxygen to make a lot of ATP. Now, you can make a little ATP out here in the cytoplasm, but the most ATP is produced in the mitochondria, thus the name powerhouse of the cell. Now, in making those ATP molecules, we're making or building ATP molecules in a process called cellular respiration. Since you're building a compound, energy is required and stored in that ATP, and then as we break down ATPs, we use it as a currency for energy for cellular activities, and as that ATP's been broken down, it releases energy that can be used by the cell. That's the mitochondria. So all these orange structures here and here and here and here are called mitochondria. Okay. Well, let's go back to ribosomes. You have ribosomes free floating in the cytoplasm, but most of them are attached to the rough endoplasmic reticulum. They are produced inside the nucleus by this structure here. They come out and are attached to the endoplasmic reticulum. The function of ribosomes is to build proteins. So protein synthesis is the function of ribosomes. So we said these interconnected canals here is the endoplasmic reticulum is a way to transport things between one area of the cell to another. But also, now the rough endoplasmic reticulum plays a role in protein synthesis also because of the ribosomes attached. This area of the endoplasmic reticulum that does not have ribosomes attached is not responsible for protein synthesis. It more lipid or fat synthesis and other things. So endoplasmic reticulum, rough and smooth, ribosomes for protein synthesis, mitochondria for cellular respiration where we're making ATPs, that currency for energy, the nucleus with the chromatin, the chromosomes that condense. The chromatin condenses into chromosomes when the cell is beginning to divide, genetic material, DNA. And so let's review a little bit here. Here's a drawing, and I put a PDF of this on Blackboard so you can print it and label the different parts. Let's look at the review over the different parts again. This area is the nucleus with the chromatin found within it. This, because it's not studded with the ribosomes, it's not rough looking. This would be the smooth endoplasmic reticulum. Here we have ribosomes attached to the ER, and the cell membrane controls movement of things into and out of the cell, also maintains the integrity of the cell, the shape of the cell. There's the chromatin, contains the genetic information. The rough endoplasmic reticulum, because we see ribosomes attached. So this rough endoplasmic reticulum is a transport system, but with the ribosomes attached, it plays a role in protein synthesis also. The mitochondria, cellular respiration, ATP production, the powerhouse of the cell.